What's up, my friends? Hope you're doing fantastic. Yes, I'm at a wedding. No, this is not an entire behind the scenes because this is a very different wedding than usual. But I did want to do like a Ask Me Anything type of Q&A, so I posted it on Instagram. Lots of great questions came back, so I figured throughout the day today, I'm going to answer some of those questions in a wedding day style Q&A. I'm excited. We're here in Doylestown today at some mansion, and it's going to be a great day. I wanted heat the whole winter. Now I don't want heat anymore. All right, question number one. Have you found a comfy pair of shoes yet? Well, they're still looking dressy. The answer is yes. These are Banana Republic. Yes. I'll try to find the exact model, but super comfy. I've been using them for years. So Adrian asked, is 4K compulsory, which I had to actually look up that word, basically mean required by law, like a rule in 2021? I'd say yes. I don't think you necessarily still have to deliver a wedding in 4K if you don't choose, but we have been shooting everything entirely for a wedding for the last 3 years in 4K. We just like having the extra flexibility. The quality is just so good. And the fact that we want the quality to live as long as possible at the quality, the highest quality. So we just like shooting everything at the highest quality possible. The size is not that big of a difference over the course of a year worth of space on hard drives and all that. So to us, it's just a no-brainer. 4K is what we always shoot. I will say with the Sonys now, we actually shoot everything in 4K 10-bit, where the GH5s, we only did 4K 8-bit. So much bigger file sizes with these cameras for sure, but they just look in color amazing. Another great question, what do you think Sony over the GH5 biggest advantage for a wedding? So no question about it. Number one, not even a question, is autofocus. Having autofocus for a wedding is such a huge advantage. We used the GH5s with full manual focus for a ton of years, and we got very used to obviously using them, but having the autofocus for stuff like gimbal work or for stuff like tracking the bride coming down the aisle, or even the stuff with the couple directly, like portrait session stuff, being able to be as shallow as you want and get some movement and not worry at all about missing focus is amazing. We can make things look super creamy with the depth of field, obviously, and not worry about missing focus. The eye autofocus on the Sonys is just unbelievably good. It does not miss when you have your target in the shot. So that's a huge advantage. Everything else, there's lots of different advantages when it comes to high frame rates and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, if we had to choose one that is the biggest advantage, it's absolutely the autofocus. The GH5s were still so reliable, unlimited recording time. They still had 4K 60. That's still our standard anyway for the stuff that we're doing with portrait stuff. So that still was possible on the GH5 anyway. The low light obviously is a massive difference as well with the FX3s, but honestly, we still light everything. So at the end of the day, the low light isn't a huge deal, even though it's pretty magnificent. And once again, all of those features would also be on the A7S III. So I would definitely not say that the FX3 is what's absolutely needed for a wedding, because the A7S III does those things as well. Still a phenomenal camera. So Carol asked if we ever have problems with radio communications during the day. The answer is we have never had any problems. We've always used Midland radios. Currently we're using these little guys. These are the Midland, I forget which model they are, but they are small and they work really well. We actually got the whole business radios as well, which are like the ones that you actually are on certain frequencies and it's like licensed through business stuff. Those are really good, especially for indoor stuff, but I don't like the earpieces that they currently have for them yet. The microphone quality for some reason is not good in it, which drives me nuts. So we currently are still using these, and then we just use these like, I think they call them like surveillance style earpieces. So then we had the little thing right here that we talk to each other. They've worked great. We've had no issues whatsoever. I think the business ones are probably better for indoor stuff when you're covering a lot of square footage, but for the most part, these things have been rock solid. So, piggybacking off of that last question though as well, Adrian asked if we use autofocus all day on the Sonys, and the answer is no. While the autofocus is amazing, obviously, and anytime we have like our subject in the frame, mostly all the time, we're gonna just default to autofocus because it works great. If we are in a reception where there's obviously a ton of faces all around, specifically like the bride and groom dancing and all that kind of stuff, if we are not really tight on the bride and groom, we don't really want to use autofocus because naturally there's hundreds of faces all over the place, so it'll try to grab a lot of different faces. So sometimes we will just turn off face detection autofocus. That way it's still just focusing on like the thing that's in the center. Normally what I do is I have it on autofocus when I'm getting the shot I want, and if I see that it hunts even one time, for example in the speeches or something, I will then just turn it off and just default to manual focus. The good thing is the autofocus is so good that it rarely ever hunts and it almost always gets what you want, which is pretty dang impressive. But you still can't rely on that. The great thing is on all of our cameras, we have a little button right on the G Master lenses on the side that we instantly hit that button and it goes right from autofocus to manual focus. So we instantly are just in manual focus by simply pressing that button. So Jay, for the record, asked, what was the worst technical problem you ever had when shooting? So I've been fortunate enough that I've never really had like any major issue, especially from a technical perspective. Like I really haven't had anything stop working or like really anything. We did crash a drone once on a wedding day, but it's not like the end of the world because obviously like, it's not like the drone shots are the most important things ever. So we've been fortunate for that perspective. In terms of my biggest error that I've ever made, which someone else did ask, I would say there have been times that we have like forgotten to start recording, and it's never been like, you know, we're screwed and we suddenly can't do anything else from the wedding and we can't edit it. But we have kind of started shooting like first dances or speeches even and forgotten to start recording until like halfway through or something crazy like that. So we have done stupid things like that here and there. Fortunately, nothing we couldn't cover in an edit, and it wasn't like the biggest deal in the world. So we've never forgotten to record like something super important that we absolutely could not do an edit from. So we've all done dumb things though, it all happens. So Melton Away asked, how do you manage the same ISO, shutter speed, aperture on both cameras with the second shooters? This actually goes way back to training, way before we actually get here on the same day. So I'm never concerned about like hollering out what ISO I'm at, what aperture I'm at, what shutter speed I'm at, white balance, any of that kind of stuff. My shooter and I never have to talk about those things while we're actually shooting. This is very well taught and trained by me to all my shooters way in advance, so they know that I need and want certain shots, and I want exposure to be correct, I want white balance to be correct. They know all the rules and things that I really want to be really important, and they know how to get those shots no matter what. So I never have to check in with them what aperture they're at or ISO, shutter speed, anything. They're very good and trained at getting the shots to look great. So it doesn't really matter what their cameras are set at. What matters is that the shot looks great, and we try and work very hard behind the scenes to make sure that ISO and shutter speed, white balance, and everything is good all the time, so that we can make sure that we get the best looking stuff. So I love this question. Steven says, when starting off, one good camera or two decent ones, for example, one FX3 or two A7Cs. If you're asking exactly about those two cameras, I'd say 100% I'd recommend getting two A7Cs instead of one FX3. With weddings, it's so important to get as many angles as possible because you only get one chance to capture it. So if you were talking about that you only have one camera or two cameras, then absolutely go for two. Now, if you're saying, should you add an FX3 or add two more A7Cs, that depends on the rest of your setup. But if you're talking about when starting off and you're literally going to go for one camera or two, definitely go two. But even more so, don't just go two cameras, but make sure that you get good lenses. Lenses are the most important thing you actually could get these days, and I'd rather see you get one A7C and tons of really good lenses than spend all your money on just one great camera body and cheap lenses. Great lenses with an okay body are way better than a great body with not good lenses. Always and forever. So this is Amy. She's the best photographer ever. Hi. Amy, how can videographers work better with photographers? Like, think about any bad experiences you've had. Hopefully it's not with us. But what could people improve in this industry from a video perspective?
I feel like the best ones that I've worked with have just been really communicative, like, and open and honest. And I just feel like in the industry, it's so, like, it attracts people that are a little bit more friendly and people-oriented. So that's like a really great thing, because when you have a good rapport with your wedding videographer and photographer together, it just like creates a synergy that's really fun. And like, I've loved working with you for the reason that like your creativity comes in and like we're able to work in a way that like blends them both. It's not just like all me or all you, it's like both. So I think that's a really fun part of it. And I would just say like communication, like that's the one word that comes to mind.
So Joshua Haynes asked, how long do you normally spend shooting on an average wedding? And the answer is, it really depends, because we don't charge based on the amount of hours. So we don't do like 8-hour packages or 10-hour packages or one shooter or two shooter. I made a video all about this if you want to watch it, but we basically do all day coverage. So that means as long as we think we need to stay. So that means we normally get there pretty early in the morning to be able to cover everything we want in the beginning. And then at the end of the night, it really just depends on what's going on. If we feel like there's still a lot of stuff worth getting, if they're doing any sort of specific exit at the end of the reception or something, maybe we'll stay to the end. Other times, if it's a 4-hour reception, we may only stay for 2 hours or 1 hour or 3 hours. We kind of just leave when we feel like we got everything we need and nothing's going to get better by us staying. So typically we don't stay to the end of the reception, but we do if something unique is happening. We're happy to do so, but not everyone does it that way. But I would say on average we're usually there 10, 12, 13 hours maybe, who knows. Usually anywhere between like 9, 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., something like that, but everyone has their own preference. Joshua also asks, and I think this is a great question, what do you do when there's bad lighting in the ceremony location? The answer is, with a ceremony, we literally will do nothing to improve it whatsoever. Not because we don't care, but because if the ceremony lighting is bad, the ceremony lighting is bad, and it's just all there is to it. We do not ever light a ceremony. If it's in a church that has terribly mixed lighting, we just do the best we can. We adjust our white balance, we adjust our exposure to look as accurate to the room as possible. So if it's a really dark outside ceremony or a really bright outside ceremony or whatever, there's really nothing we can do, and we kind of just let it be what it is. We've gone to churches where it's incredibly dark, and sure, we would have loved to light things and make it look even better, but that's just what they chose, and so we just kind of make it work with whatever. The ceremony is what it is. When it comes to reception, that's a whole different story. We obviously will light that and make it look how we want, and if we need lighting to make it look better, which in most cases we will light things, we are happy to do so, and we do not feel bad about doing that. Chris Cardoso asks, best source of backup audio when the DJ has a low quality system? This is another great question because a lot of times the DJ does not have a great system. Here's what I could say. The best audio source that you can get, no question, when it comes to a DJ and a reception is to get the main feed out from the speaker. If they're using powered speakers, you always can run an XLR out of the actual speaker, and that'll give you the main source that's coming out, and so anything that they're sending to the speakers, you're going to get as well. I always recommend getting speaker out, and I never ever recommend that you get the audio out from the actual mixer, because a DJ most times doesn't have a great mixer setup. The only time I would ever take an actual board mix would be from like a band, because the band usually would have their own sound guy, and a sound guy will send it to you. But be careful, because if you are getting something from like a DJ who has a mixer, or even a band who has an audio guy, they could be sending it out of what's called like an aux send, and they may not be sending what you actually think you need out of that. So they may try to give you this clean feed and say, okay, cool, yeah, I'll send the stuff down that feed. We've had that happen where they don't actually send it down there. So make sure that you have what you know you need coming into that unit. If I could not get a feed from the DJ at all for some crazy reason, which has never happened to us, then my backup would be that I would put a lav mic with like the DR10L Tascam recorders on the people giving the speeches to make sure that I still get those no matter what. The speeches are really the only thing I care about in the actual reception, so if all else failed and that's the only thing I was able to get from the actual reception, I'd still be fine with it because it's really all I use. Dunk Butler asked, shadow established videographers or just do it myself and learn on my own? I would say absolutely, if you can, shadow some people, second shoot, third shoot, assist, do anything you can to learn. I really recommend that you do that before you show up for the very first time at a wedding, because there is a lot of stuff that you have to deal with. We do have incredible resources these days with YouTube and a bunch of people online that do a lot of kind of documenting this process, so you can learn a lot even if you've never shot one yourself. So I will say personally that I never actually shadowed anyone before I first did my own wedding, but I watched a lot of videos on how to do it properly and felt like I was pretty ready to do it. But if you can get the opportunity to shadow someone that's already doing it, 1,000,000% do that. It will help you out tremendously, and most people will take a free assistant anytime that you can at least learn and help them, and they'll be all for you just helping carry gear and just learn. So reach out to people. In regards to audio, Roy asked, audio gear breakdown. The gear is pretty simple now. We use 2 Tascam DR10Ls with Countryman B6 microphones for all the ceremony things, the lavs that we put on people. And then for the reception, we use the Zoom F6 straight into the DJ outs, usually from the actual main speaker like I talked about. We shoot it all in 32-bit float audio now, which is amazing because literally you can't get clipping, and The audio can't even be too low. You get full capability in post, which makes a huge difference. The DR10Ls do not have that option, so we will be switching those soon because there are some options now that even the lavs have 32-bit float, which is amazing. If you don't know what 32-bit float is, it basically gives you full flexibility, just like RAW in video or photos, where even if you get clipping, you can bring it back down and it still has all that information. Same with if you record things too low, you still can bring it up without getting a lot of hissing from bad preamps and or just trying to boost it in post. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. 32-bit float is game-changing for audio. Cinema D Productions asked, how is the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization on the new FX3s in comparison to the GH5s? The answer is it's actually really, really good. I think the GH5 had the best image stabilization of literally any camera I've ever used. The tripod mode on the GH5 is just like mind-boggling good. But I will say, with these cameras on active stabilization, it is very, very good. I have basically kind of replaced using the gimbal in most situations just for using the 24mm with active stabilization on just handheld, and it's amazing what I can get from it, even with just like no gimbal at all. So it's very, very good, especially if you pair it with a lens that actually has image stabilization and then you use active. It's really, really good. I think the GH5 is still better, but this is about 90% as good as the GH5, so in my opinion, crazy usable. I still do use a gimbal from time to time at weddings, and when I do, this is normally my rig, so I do no handle or anything obviously up top, no microphone, just the FX3 with a 24mm G Master. I balance it with the screen out so that I'm looking at like basically that rig, and I really, really like it. I really love the results I get from it. I normally shoot those in 4K 60 frames a second, 10-bit. It looks real, real nice. Triply J asked, what's the best beginner camera? This is a really hard one to answer because I don't know what you consider beginner in terms of like, is it a certain price that you're thinking? Is it a certain ease of use? I don't really know. So let's just say you're asking me what the best under $2,000 camera is, because I feel like that's kind of a good starting point. Yes, you can get something way cheaper, but if you get around $2,000 for a camera body, you can get a really good camera these days. No doubt about it, the one I'd recommend right now would be this, the Sony A7C. Full frame camera, really, really good quality, great autofocus, still really good high frame rate stuff, super tiny little compact body. The thing works great. This is not my camera, this is actually Ben's, but it's a great camera. It looks great. I've shot things even on my own channel as B-roll to like the actual A7S III, and honestly, it's a great camera. There are a few things that it's missing, like 4K 10-bit and some of the high frame rate options, but I don't think at the end of the day that's like a deal breaker, and depending on what you're shooting, you may not need those things. So under $2,000, I think this camera by far is the best camera you can buy right now for that price. So question here on picture profile, do you stay in S-Log3 when it's dark on wedding days? The answer is no, but that's because we don't actually shoot in S-Log3 at all. I've grown to love S-Log3, I love grading it, I think it's a great picture profile, but I am obsessed right now, especially for weddings, with S-Cinetone. I think that S-Cinetone provides exactly the dynamic range that we actually really need on a wedding day. It still looks amazing at a camera. It still can grade amazingly. It is just such a beautiful picture profile for skin tones that I've just been obsessed with it, and I don't really feel like there's any reason not to use that profile for weddings. Doesn't mean you can't use S-Log3, but for weddings, I just think that S-Cinetone is just absolutely perfect. So we use that all day, and it works amazingly for us. Just our preference though. S-Log3 also is great, but yeah, you can get some more noise in low light, but honestly, the A7S III and the FX3, they have such unbelievable low light that really it's hard to find noise anywhere. All right, and that's a wrap. Hopefully I answered all your questions. See you tomorrow.